January 1956, Tulsa, Oklahoma. The Zero Hour Bomb Company officially changed its name to Zeebco and stopped producing oil-filled materials entirely. A bomb manufacturer had just become a fishing company. The push-button reel had already been in production for nearly a decade before that January day in Tulsa. It did not start there. It started with a Texas watchmaker, a piece of plywood, and a company that made electric time bombs for a living. In 1932, the Zero Hour Bomb Company began manufacturing electric time bombs in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The bombs were electrically triggered and designed to be dropped down an oil well to break apart rock and release the crude below. In the 1930s, Zero Hour held a patent on those bombs, a patent that helped the United States supply 63% of the world's oil. That patent was the entire company. One product, one industry. By the end of World War II, the US oil industry began to change. Vast fossil fuel reserves beneath Middle Eastern nations were being unlocked, and Texas and Oklahoma-based oil production was about to take a decades-long backseat to foreign oil. Facing the rise of foreign oil and the 1948 expiration of their patent, the Zero Hour Bomb Company needed a solution. 500 miles away in Texas, a different problem was forming. American fishermen in the 1940s used bait casting reels as their standard tool. A bait casting reel's spool spins freely during a cast, and when it spins faster than the line can leave the reel, loops of line pile up and jam the reel in a tangle called a bird's nest. Avoiding it required precise thumb pressure on the spool during every single cast. One mistake and the line was ruined. Fishing required skill most people did not have. Hull had already produced 2 fishing reels, both failures, before arriving in Tulsa in 1947. R.D. Hull, the man behind the button. Jasper Ardell Hull was born on December 9, 1912, in Snyder, Texas. He grew up in Rowton, a small West Texas town with a population of a few hundred people. Hull was a watchmaker, an itinerant inventor. He repaired small, precise mechanical things for a living. A watch has dozens of parts, each one dependent on every other one. And if a single component is off by a fraction of a millimeter, the whole mechanism fails. Hull understood that kind of tolerance. That precision would become the foundation of everything he built. Hull was also a fisherman. He used the same bait casting reels that every other angler in America used in the 1940s, and he understood exactly what was wrong with them. Hull was earning $85 a week when he began tinkering with ways to improve the casting reel, then in use. The problem was that the spool spun faster than the line fed out, creating a snarled mess known as backlash. He did not accept that this was simply how fishing worked. The first failure, the Lash Master. Hull's first attempt at solving the backlash problem produced a reel called the Lash Master. His first reel was a double spool model he modified from a South Bend design. From a small pool of investors, he collected $52,500 in startup funding, dubbed his reel the Lash Master, and quickly went out of business. The Lash Master failed, his investors lost their money, and Hull lost his company. Undeterred, he continued his search for the perfect anti-backlash design. He built a second prototype. RD's spin cast reel used a dozen nails to form a hub between 2 wooden discs. A long bolt through the middle served as a spindle, and a Folgers coffee can, lid fastened to the front wheel, provided a handle for reeling in line. The device worked. It could cast without backlashing, but it made a poor impression on his former investors. In 1947, they turned him down. The grocery store. Hull kept looking. One day in 1947, Hull got an idea while watching a grocery clerk peel cord from the end of a fixed spool. It fed smoothly without tangling. The insight was mechanical and exact. On a bait casting reel, the spool itself rotates during a cast. When the lure slows down in the air, the spool keeps spinning and the line piles up on itself. On a fixed spool, the spool never moves at all. The line simply peels off the end. There is no spinning spool to outrun the line. There is no backlash. Hull told Tulsa World outdoor writer Sam Powell in 1975 that the most important new idea he came up with concerned putting the cover on the reel. That was the big problem. How to keep that line from spilling off the spool. Hull tinkered for months. Then he went looking for a company willing to manufacture it. Hull walks into the Zero Hour Bomb Company. In 1947, Hull walked into the Tulsa offices of the Zero Hour Bomb Company, carrying a piece of plywood with nails arranged in a circle, wrapped in fishing line. His device included a coffee can lid that could spin. He had an appointment with executives at the Oklahoma Oilfield Service Company. He did not have a polished product. He had nails, plywood, and a coffee can lid. Zero Hour executives asked company machinist and fishing enthusiast Charlie Noble to test the reel. Noble was a fisherman who understood immediately what he was looking at. A few weeks later, Noble returned raving that the product was the greatest casting device he had ever seen. After examining Hull's prototype, the company hired him for $500 a month. A bomb manufacturer had just committed its factory and its payroll to a fishing reel. The first reel, the Standard. Hull and Noble worked through the engineering together. They built prototypes, tested them, broke them, and rebuilt them. Hull tested several designs before developing a manufacturing process. The first reel debuted on May 13, 1949. Called the Standard, it made its public debut at a Tulsa Sports Expo in June 1949. In June 1949, the first 50 handmade closed-face fishing reels rolled off the production line. Each one was assembled by hand. There was no automated process. A small team of workers at a Tulsa bomb factory sat at benches and put together a fishing reel, one component at a time, 50 times. The Standard was a closed-face reel. That was the key difference from everything else on the market. The spool was hidden inside a plastic cover. There was no exposed line, no spinning drum for an angler to manage with their thumb. Hull's invention created a way for line to easily spool off a reel without tangling. That meant no more backlash. A user pressed one button, held it, swung the rod forward, and released the button at the peak of the cast. The line flew cleanly. The reel was so simple that Zebco quickly began replacing cane poles as the go-to tackle for fishermen. The Standard quickly became a hit, even though its resemblance to a beer can grew into a running joke. Hull, rather than being bothered, made a joke version of the reel, styled to look like an actual beer can, and brought it to trade shows. The crowd loved it. Selling the Standard, getting the reel into the hands of American fishermen required more than a product. It required proof. Most anglers in 1949 had spent years fighting backlash. They were skeptical that a push-button reel from a bomb company could actually solve the problem they had accepted as unavoidable. George Goetz was Zebco's first sales rep. Goetz demonstrated the reel's ease of use with casting tricks, even wearing boxing gloves. A man wearing boxing gloves cannot feel the line. He cannot control a spool with his thumb. He cannot manage the mechanics of a bait casting reel at all. But he could press a single button, and the line flew straight and clean. The Zebco booth attracted crowds at sports shows across the country. The demonstration sold the reel faster than any advertisement could have. Hull built the lineup, models 22, 11, and 33. Hull did not stop at the Standard. He stayed at his workbench. The Model 22 was the second reel Zebco made, produced in 1953. The Model 11 was the third reel, also produced in 1953, and it remained in production until 1972. The Model 22 was priced higher. The Model 11 was the more affordable option, designed to bring more anglers into the market. By 1954, the reel included the simple push-button system used today. That push-button, a single thumb-operated control that locked the line during a cast and released it on command, was the mechanical refinement that completed Hull's original concept from the grocery store. In 1954, the original Zebco 33 was introduced, selling for $19.50. In today's money, That is approximately $214. It was the introduction of the Zebco 33 in 1954 that cemented their legacy. It became the single most popular fishing reel of all time. Within a few months of the Zebco name change in 1956, the iconic Model 33 launched and sales rose 280%. More than 40 million Zebco 33s have been sold since the first one left the factory in 1954. Hull's 30-year record began with a simple fact. He maintained his desk at the company, and he continued drawing, testing, and filing patents. He remained in the firm's production department. He designed 26 reels and received 35 patents before retiring in May 1977. He died soon after, in December 1977. R.D. Hull never held ownership in the company. He served as Vice President of Research and Development for his entire time there. He built the product that turned a dying bomb manufacturer into one of the most recognized brands in American sporting goods history. Those 35 patents covered work he did inside the company. The bomb company's name was still on every reel sold in America. By the time the Zebco 33 was outselling every other fishing reel in the country, packages were still stamped 0 Hour Bomb Company, Tulsa, Oklahoma. That name was about to cause a problem at the White House. The reel on the bottom of every reel. Through all of the sales growth, through all the sports shows and boxing glove demonstrations and crowds, one thing had not changed since 1949. The regional marketing name, Zebco, had become popular, but the bottom of each reel's foot remained stamped with the name of the manufacturer, 0 Hour Bomb Company. Every Zebco reel sold in America between 1949 and January 1956 carried that stamp. A person buying a fishing reel at a sporting goods store in 1954 was taking home a product manufactured by a bomb company. Most customers never turned the reel over to read it. One package addressed to the President of the United States changed everything: the White House incident. In 1956, a friend of President Dwight D. Eisenhower asked the company to ship a reel to the White House. Eisenhower was an avid outdoorsman. The request was simple. The company packaged a reel and mailed it to Washington. When White House security officers saw the package labeled 0 Hour Bomb Company, they plunged it into a tub of water and called the bomb squad. A fishing reel had just been treated as a credible threat to the President of the United States. In January 1956, the company changed its name to Zebco and ceased to produce oilfield-related materials. The bomb squad incident did not cause the name change alone. The company had already outgrown its original identity. The fishing reels had overtaken the bomb business years earlier, but the incident at the White House removed any remaining hesitation. What Zebco stands for. The fishing reels had gone into production in 1949 using an acronym of the company's name, Zebco. Z from zero, B from bomb, Co from company. The name had been used in regional marketing for 7 years before it became the company's legal identity. The name Zebco was coined by one of the line workers during an employee contest. The person who named one of the most recognized brands in American fishing history was a factory worker on the assembly floor, not a marketing executive. After January 1956, the 0 Hour Bomb Company no longer existed. For a while, the roles had been reversed. The 0 Hour Bomb Company continued to make time bombs as a division of the fishing business. Now even that division was gone. Bill Carter and the world record. Also in 1956, Zebco's Texas sales representative set out to demonstrate the reel's core promise in the most dramatic way possible. Bill Carter was the representative. Carter set a world record for most casts without a backlash, 3,453 casts in 14 hours and 14 minutes. Carter had cast a Zebco 33 an average of 242.3 times per hour, slightly more than 4 casts per minute without a single backlash. It is a record that still stands. That record was not just a stunt, It was measurable proof of the reel's fundamental claim. The standard, the 33, every reel Hull had designed from a piece of plywood and a coffee can lid. They all delivered on the same guarantee: no backlash, no matter how many casts you make. Brunswick, the 202, an industrial scale. In 1961, Brunswick Corporation acquired Zebco and introduced the 202 ZB Spincast. Described as an instant classic, Brunswick was not a fishing company. Brunswick made bowling equipment, billiard tables, and Mercury marine engines. It was a large American manufacturer with distribution infrastructure that Zebco, still operating out of Tulsa, did not yet have. The acquisition gave Zebco national reach. After the acquisition, Zebco acquired several smaller firms, expanded their national presence, and became involved in international marketing of their growing line of fishing equipment. The Model 202 was the affordable entry point into the Zebco lineup, priced below the Model 33 and aimed at budget-conscious buyers and first-time fishermen. In the early 1970s, Zebco was producing 30,000 Model 202s per day, compared to 3,000 Model 33s per day during the same period. 30,000 reels in a single day. The factory floor that once hand-made 50 reels at a time in 1949 had become one of the highest volume fishing tackle operations in the world. The cultural footprint. Zebco did not just sell reels, it embedded itself into American popular culture. A young Mickey Mantle and television actor Tonto appeared at a New York sports show to examine the latest Zebco reels. Mickey Mantle was the New York Yankees center fielder and one of the most famous athletes in America. Tonto was the character played by Jay Silverheels on The Lone Ranger, one of the most watched television programs in the country. Both men were at a Zebco booth. Zebco became the first fishing tackle manufacturer to advertise on US network television. Before Zebco, fishing tackle was marketed in sports catalogs and at trade shows. Zebco put a push-button reel on American television and reached millions of households that had never considered buying a fishing reel. By 1975, some 70 million reels had been sold. In 26 years, a company that had started with 50 hand-assembled units had reached that total. Hull's induction and his death. In 1975, R.D. Hull sat in an auditorium and was recognised for what he had built. He joined the Sporting Goods Industry Hall of Fame that year. Hull retired from the former oilfield Time Bomb company in January 1977 after being diagnosed with cancer, and he died in December at age 64. He had spent 30 years improving a single idea, a fixed spool, a closed face, and a button. He had first imagined it while watching a grocery clerk pull twine in a Texas meat market. He held 35 patents on work done inside the same company the entire time. He never owned the company. He served as Vice President of Research and Development throughout his time there. In 2001, the W.C. Bradley Company bought Zebco from Brunswick. Zebco had now changed corporate hands twice in 40 years. The headquarters remained in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the same city where Hull had walked in with a board full of nails in 1947. New versions of the Zebco Model 33 were released in 2004 and 2014 to mark the reel's 50th and 60th anniversaries. The new models featured updates, including an electronic bite alert, but they do not look significantly different from the original. The push-button system that Hull refined in 1954 is still on the reel today. The enclosed spool that he argued for, the cover, the thing he called the most important idea he ever had, is still there. More than 40 million Zebco Model 33 reels have been sold since the first one left the factory in 1954. A man born in Snyder, Texas, in 1912, who repaired watches for a living and lost his first company, walked into a bomb factory in 1947 with scrap materials and built the most sold fishing reel in American history. If you enjoyed this story about the bomb company that accidentally taught America to fish, subscribe and like the video. It helps more stories like this one reach more people. In 1887, Henning Hammarlund built Sweden's first pocket watch factory in Svängsta, a small village in the Blekinge region beside the Mörrum River. He named it Halda Fabrik AB. Halda's watches won gold medals at world fairs in Chicago in 1893, Stockholm in 1897, and Paris in 1912. 34 years later, a former Halda employee named Carl August Borgström bought Halda's machines and started his own company on the same riverbank. He called it AB Fabriken. It made watches. Carl August Borgström started AB Fabriken in 1921 with 17,000 kroner. He bought the machines directly from the shuttered Halda factory and moved them into an old chapel building on Hollandarevägen, the same street, the same river, the same village. The name he chose told the whole story. AB stood for August Borgström. Fabriken was Swedish for watch factory. Together, ABU's first products were telephone timers called the Telia. One of ABU's first clients for the Telia was LM Ericsson, the company that would eventually become one of the largest telecommunications corporations on Earth. In 1926, ABU added taxi meters to its product line, building meters for horse wagons and taxicabs across Sweden. Carl August died in 1934 at the age of 63. His son Göte, then 30 years old, took over the company. Göte was not just a businessman, he was a fisherman. The Mörrum River ran directly outside the factory walls, and Göte had grown up fishing it. By 1939, Göte and his engineer, Stig Svensson, had spent 5 years developing a new taximeter. The record taximeter Model 39 was the lightest and most compact on the market. That same year, Germany invaded Poland. World War II reached Sweden's economy in September 1939. Within weeks, European trade collapsed. Taximeter exports, the product Göte had spent 5 years perfecting, stopped completely. ABU had 18 years of precision manufacturing behind it. The machines were still running. The craftsmen still showed up every morning. The factory on Hollandarevägen had not changed. What had changed was that nobody needed taximeters anymore. Göte Borgström made a decision in 1940. He would not wait for the war to end. ABU would change what it built. He did not choose fishing reels randomly. Göte had fished the Mörrum River his entire life. His father, Carl August, had hand-built a simple reel for fishing that same river years earlier. Göte understood fishing tackle the way a watchmaker understands a movement, by feel, by function, by what was missing. What was missing, in Göte's assessment, was precision. The reels available to Swedish anglers in 1940 were crude compared to what a factory full of watchmakers could produce. Göte bought several of the most popular American bait casting reels on the market and took them apart on his workbench. He studied each one, he noted what worked, he noted what did not. Then he set ABU's craftsmen to work building something better. In 1941, AB Fabriken introduced its first fishing reel. It was called the ABU Record. The record was built to the same tolerances ABU had used for 2 decades to build watch gears and taximeter mechanisms. It was not a hobby product, it was a precision instrument that happened to be designed for fishing. The ABU Record sold. It proved the concept, but Göte was already thinking past it. The problem Göte was turning over in his mind was casting. Specifically, the problem every angler in the world faced in 1941 when using a bait casting reel: backlash. When a bait casting reel's spool spun faster than the line leaving it, the line piled up and tangled into what anglers called a bird's nest. Clearing a bird's nest could take 10 minutes. It happened to beginners constantly and to experienced anglers regularly. Every reel manufacturer in the world had accepted it as an unavoidable feature of bait casting. Göte did not accept it, did not. In 1949, Göte Borgström hired an engineer named Eik Mervall. Mervall's title was production manager and construction manager. His real function was to solve problems that no one else had solved. Merville was not a fisherman. That was deliberate. Gautier needed someone who would approach the reel as an engineering problem, not as a fishing tradition. Gautier provided the fishing knowledge, every cast, every tangle, every frustration he had accumulated over decades on the Morum. Merville provided the mechanical solutions. Together, they began work on a reel that had never existed before. Together, they would rebuild how casting worked. Between 1949 and 1951, Gautier and Merville worked through the core engineering challenge. A bait casting reel's spool needed to spin freely during a cast to achieve distance, but a freely spinning spool with no governing mechanism would always outrun the line. The solution Merville engineered was a centrifugal brake, a set of small brake blocks inside the spool that used centrifugal force to automatically slow the spool as it accelerated, preventing it from spinning faster than the outgoing line. No production reel in the world had combined a centrifugal brake with a free-running spool and a level wind mechanism in a single unit. A level wind mechanism was a guide that moved back and forth across the spool automatically during retrieval, laying the line evenly so it would cast cleanly on the next throw. Level wind. The combination of all three systems in one compact, anodized aluminum body was the engineering breakthrough. By May 1951, the first physical test reels existed. 5 were produced that month, 1 in each of 5 colors. The first prototypes. By October and November of the same year, 60 more prototype reels had been built, 20 in red, 20 in green, and 20 in black. The color decision was not cosmetic. Every other reel on the market in 1951 was either nickel-plated or chrome-plated. Both finishes were silver. The new reel was made from anodized aluminum, which meant for the first time in the history of fishing reels, color was a manufacturing option. Gautier understood this was a marketing opportunity unlike anything the industry had seen. In August 1952, Gautier took the finished reel to Stockholm. The venue was the St. Erik's Fair, one of Sweden's largest consumer exhibitions. Visitors to the ABU stand were shown 3 versions of the reel, red, black and green. They were asked to vote for their preferred colour. Black won the vote. Gautier had already decided on red. He had fallen in love with it during the prototype phase. No other bait casting reel in the world was red. Every reel on the market was silver. A red reel on a Swedish salmon river would be impossible to miss and impossible to forget. Red went into production. A magazine advertisement placed in late 1952 carried the headline, "Technical Perfection, the Ambassador from Svankstad." The reel was priced at 150 krona, a significant sum at the time, equivalent to roughly several days of wages for a Swedish factory worker. It was ready for delivery by Christmas 1952. It first appeared in the Tight Lines fishing catalogue in 1953 under the full name, the Record Ambassador. The Record Ambassador was the world's first fishing reel to combine 3 technologies in a single unit: a free-running spool, a level wind mechanism, and a centrifugal brake. The anodized aluminum body was lighter than any chrome or nickel-plated reel on the market. The push-button free spool release allowed an angler to disengage the spool with a single thumb press before a cast, then re-engage it automatically on the first turn of the handle. These were not incremental improvements. They were new features that the fishing world had not had before. Gautier had built a reel that made the act of casting easier, more accurate, and more consistent for every angler who held one, from the most experienced salmon fisherman on the Morum to someone picking up a rod for the first time. By 1954, the reel was selling in Sweden, but Gautier knew the real market was elsewhere. In 1954, Gautier's son, Lennart Borgström, joined ABU as export manager. He was 24 years old. His job was to take the Ambassador to the world. That same year, Gautier and Lennart travelled to the United States for the first time. Their destination was Chicago. They stayed at the Conrad Hilton Hotel, where the American Fishing Tackle Manufacturers Association, known as AFTMA, held its annual trade show. The AFTMA show was the single most important gathering in the American fishing tackle industry. Every major buyer, distributor, and retailer in the country attended. Gautier did not speak English, not a word. Lennart handled every conversation. He stood at the ABU display and explained the Ambassador's features to American buyers: the centrifugal brake, the level wind, the push-button-free spool, the anodized aluminum body, and the red finish that no other reel in the room shared. Gautier stood beside him and demonstrated. He cast the reel, he let buyers hold it. He smiled, and he let the reel speak in the language he did not have. At that show, the Ambassador 5000 cost $45. In 1954, $45 represented roughly a week's wages for an average American worker. It was not a cheap reel. The buyers did not care. The reel cast further, more accurately, and with fewer tangles than anything else on the table. The Americans loved it. One buyer at that show was a representative from a New Jersey-based fishing tackle distributor called the Garcia Corporation, formerly known as Charles Garcia and Company of New York City. Garcia was the largest sporting goods distributor in the United States. A deal was not struck immediately. Garcia's leadership initially showed limited interest. That would not last long. By 1956, Garcia had recognized what it had passed on at the AFTMA show. A new agreement was reached. Garcia became the exclusive ABU distributor for the entire United States market. Garcia catalogued the Ambassador for the first time in its 1957 trade catalogue. A small factory beside a river in a Swedish village of several hundred people was now supplying the biggest fishing tackle distributor in America. The Ambassador 5000 was about to reach every tackle shop, every sporting goods store, and every serious angler in the United States. By 1956, the Ambassador was selling across the United States through Garcia's distribution network. ABU's factory on Hollanderavagen was running at a pace Carl August Borgström could not have imagined when he moved his watchmaking machines into that old chapel in 1921. But Gautier Borgström was not finished building. In 1955, ABU introduced its first spinning reel. It was called the ABU 444. A spinning reel operates differently from a bait casting reel. The spool stays fixed during a cast, and the line peels off the front of the spool, rather than unwinding from a rotating drum. The ABU 44 gave ABU a product for anglers who preferred spinning over bait casting, which was a significant portion of the global market. In 1956, ABU introduced the ABU-Matic. The ABU-Matic was a spin cast reel, a design that enclosed the spool inside a cone-shaped cover with a single push-button release. Spin cast reels were simpler to operate than either bait casters or spinning reels, which made them popular with beginners and casual anglers. ABU built its version with the same precision tolerances it applied to every product that left the Svanksta factory. The ABU-Matic also became the subject of one of the most deliberate traps in the history of industrial manufacturing. By the late 1950s, ABU's products were being copied. Manufacturers in other countries, most notably Japan, were producing near-identical versions of ABU reels and selling them at lower prices. ABU's legal team needed a way to prove copying in court, but proving that a competitor had copied a design required evidence that went beyond visual similarity. Ake Mervel's engineering team provided that evidence in advance. During the development of the ABU-Matic, a small hole had been drilled into the prototype housing to secure the spool during testing. When the final production design was completed, the spool was secured by a different method. The hole was no longer needed. It served no mechanical function on the finished reel. Mervel left the hole in. When Japanese copies of the ABU-Matic appeared on the market, they included the hole. A hole with no mechanical purpose, present in both the original and the copy, was proof in court that the design had been directly duplicated. ABU used that evidence successfully. The non-functional whole had done exactly what Merville intended it to do. In 1963, the first Japanese copies of the Ambassadeur itself appeared. By that point, the Ambassadeur had been on the market for 11 years. It had been copied because it was worth copying. In 1965, ABU introduced the Cardinal spinning reel series. The Cardinal became one of the most celebrated spinning reels ever produced. In the early 1970s, dedicated carp anglers across Europe, including some of the sport's most prominent figures, adopted the Cardinal 55 as their reel of choice, citing its drag system and overall build quality as unmatched at the time. At some point during ABU's years of growth, the company received recognition that no distributor agreement or trade show appearance could provide. ABU was awarded a Swedish royal warrant. The formal title was Kunglig Hovleverantor, purveyors to the court of Sweden. The warrant was granted by the Swedish royal family in recognition of the company's quality and craftsmanship. It entitled ABU to display the royal seal on its products. A factory that had started by making telephone timers and taximeters was now the official fishing tackle supplier to the Swedish crown. In May 1974, Göte Borgström died. He had taken a failing taximeter company in the middle of a world war and turned it into the most respected fishing reel manufacturer on Earth. The Ambassadeur had been in production for 22 years at the time of his death. It was being sold on every continent where people fished. His son Lennart Borgström, who had stood beside him at the Conrad Hilton Hotel in Chicago in 1954 and translated his father's demonstrations into English, now carried the company forward. The Ambassadeur kept selling. New models followed the original. The 5000 series expanded. The 6000 series was introduced. Each new model retained the core engineering that Göte and Ake Merville had developed in Svankster: the centrifugal brake, the level wind, the free-running spool, the anodized aluminum body. By 1980, the relationship between ABU and the Garcia Corporation had deepened beyond a distribution agreement. Garcia had been ABU's exclusive American distributor since 1956. In 1980, ABU Svankster acquired the New Jersey-based Garcia Tackle Company outright. The two names that had been linked since the 1950s were now a single company. In 1984, the name became official. The company was formally renamed Abu Garcia. The brand name that anglers around the world now recognize on every reel, every rod, and every piece of tackle was the product of that 1984 renaming, itself the product of a 1980 acquisition, itself the product of a distribution deal struck in 1956 at a trade show in Chicago, itself the product of a red reel built by a watchmaker's son in a village beside a Swedish river. By the mid-1980s, the factory on Holland Arevagen in Svankster had produced millions of reels. The exact cumulative total, counted across the full history of the factory, would eventually reach 33 million. But the business was changing around Abu Garcia in ways that the Borgström family had not faced before. Through the late 1980s and into the early 1990s, Abu Garcia faced compounding financial pressure. The Swedish tax system placed heavy burdens on manufacturing companies. Global competition from Asian reel manufacturers, the same manufacturers ABU had been fighting in court since the 1960s, had matured into legitimate competition, producing quality products at significantly lower cost. Abu Garcia was losing ground commercially, even as its reputation remained intact. By the mid-1990s, the options had narrowed to two. Abu Garcia could cease operations entirely, ending 74 years of continuous manufacturing on Holland Arevagen. Or it could accept acquisition by a larger corporation that had the capital to sustain it. In 1995, Abu Garcia became part of the Outdoor Technologies Group. In 2000, Outdoor Technologies Group changed its name to Pure Fishing. Under Pure Fishing, Abu Garcia was placed alongside a portfolio of brands that grew to include Berkley, Penn, Shakespeare, Pfluger, Mitchell, and Fenwick. Pure Fishing became one of the largest fishing tackle conglomerates in the world. In April 2007, the Jarden Corporation acquired Pure Fishing. In December 2015, Newell Rubbermaid acquired Jarden Corporation. In November 2018, Newell Rubbermaid sold Pure Fishing to Sycamore Partners, a private equity firm based in New York City. Abu Garcia had passed through 4 different ownership structures in 23 years. Each transaction was larger than the one before it. Each one moved the company's ownership further from Svankster. The factory on Hollander Evergen kept running through every transaction. In 1991, the Svankster factory introduced automated assembly for the Ambassadeur handle side plate. A series of machines now produced the component at a speed and consistency that manual assembly could not match. That automation was the specific reason the Svankster factory could continue operating after Abu Garcia's manufacturing shifted increasingly to Asia. Without it, the cost differential would have made the Swedish factory impossible to justify. Today, most Abu Garcia reels are manufactured in China and Korea. The cost economics of global manufacturing made the shift inevitable. But one reel line has never left Svankster. The Ambassadeur, the reel Gotte Borgström, and A.K. Merville designed between 1949 and 1952 in a converted chapel beside the Morum River, is still built on Hollander Evergen. Collector's editions, custom models, the C3 and C4 series, up to size 6500, all of them still come from the same address. The factory that opened in 1921 has been in continuous operation for over 100 years. When John Wayne was introduced to Lennart Borgström at a marina in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, he grabbed a chair, sat down next to Lennart, and told him he could not believe it, and that he had to have a dozen of those. He was talking about the Ambassadeur, a Hollywood actor with a converted US Navy minesweeper, as his private vessel owned 12 of them. Lennart Borgström asked about the durability of the Ambassadeur late in his life, said he did not know of anyone who had really worn one out. You cannot wear out an Ambassadeur, you can wear it in. In 2013, Abu Garcia commissioned a documentary about its own history. The film was called For Life, the story of Abu Garcia. It was shot across 14 locations, from Sweden to the United States, and featured perspectives from 13 individuals. The Swedish phrase in the film's original title was Allting går igen, which translates to everything comes round. The factory on Holländarvägen still stands. The Morum River still runs beside it. Over 33 million reels have been made inside that building, the same building where Carl August Borgström set up his watchmaking machines in 1921, in a village that cost 800 kroner to build a factory in. Beside a river, his grandson would spend a lifetime fishing. If this story earned your time, subscribe and give this video a like. It helps more people find stories like this one. February 1921, Sakai City, Osaka, Japan. Shoza Buro. Shimano rented a 40 square meter room on the site of a demolished celluloid factory. His monthly rent was 5 yen. His only machine was a single lathe, 1.8 meters long, borrowed from a friend. He was 26 years old. In 2024, the company that Lathe built recorded $2.87 billion in revenue. Fishing tackle alone represented 23.3% of total sales. That fishing business did not exist. When Shimano was founded, it had to be built, and before it could be built, Shimano had to conquer an entirely different market first. Sakai was not a random choice. The city was a legendary blacksmithing centre, historically known for its swords and gun barrels. Metalwork was not an industry in Sakai. It was a culture. Shozaburo had apprenticed at an ironworks after finishing school, rather than follow his father into farming. He arrived at his 40-square-metre workshop with trained hands and one clear goal. In his second year, he made his first freewheel. He chose the freewheel because its production was particularly challenging, even in Sakai, and because product quality needed radical improvements. Freewheels made in Japan at that time were far inferior to imports in terms of strength, accuracy, and appearance. Many of the freewheels on Japanese bicycles were foreign-made. Shozaburo fixed that. By 1930, Shimano was producing 30,000 single-speed freewheels per year. To establish a reputation for quality, he offered 2 free replacements for every product that failed. The policy worked. Shimano refused to produce complete bicycles. As one of Shozaburo's sons later said, "Our founder said, never ever compete with a customer. Shimano would make the parts, someone else would build the bike." That rule held for a century, and it is exactly why Shimano eventually made fishing reels. In 1957, Shimano's engineers attended a trade fair. A West German company was demonstrating cold forging, a technique that shaped a metal using compressive force at room temperature, without cutting or removing material. The Shimano engineers watched, and then they went back to Sakai and spent 5 years figuring out how to do it themselves. Shimano applied cold forging in actual production starting in 1962, making it one of the pioneers of the technique in Japan. The process cuts alloy blocks into blanks, then stamps them into their final shape under enormous pressure. The largest machines Shimano built produce up to 2,000 tons of force. The result was a part that was simultaneously lighter, stronger, and more precise than anything produced through conventional machining. Every bicycle component Shimano made from that point forward was built on that foundation. So was every fishing reel that came after. By the early 1960s, Shimano was ready to take the next step. In 1961, Shimano displayed a 3-speed bicycle hub at the New York Toy Show. The popularity of 20-inch wheeled bikes with high-rise handlebars had created demand for multi-speed hubs, and Shimano was producing an affordable and reliable version that caught the attention of the American industry. The timing was not accidental. Shimano had been watching the American bicycle market closely, and what it saw was an opening. By 1965, Shimano opened its first overseas sales office in New York City. The main purpose was to get quicker product feedback and to provide technical and warranty assistance to retailers selling bikes equipped with Shimano parts. The first office was staffed by 3 people. 3 people. That was the entire American operation. Shimano American Corporation was formally set up in January 1965. It was a bicycle parts distributor. Fishing was not part of the plan yet, but the infrastructure Shimano built in those years, the distribution relationships, the retailer contacts, and the product feedback loops became the exact same infrastructure it would later use to sell fishing reels to American anglers. The American bicycle market rewarded Shimano's investment quickly. When the 1970s United States bike boom exceeded the capacity of European bicycle component manufacturers, Japanese manufacturers, including Shimano, rapidly stepped in to fill the void. In the 1980s, with Shimano pushing technical innovation and lower prices, the more traditional European component manufacturers lost significant market presence. Shimano did not win by being cheaper. It won by being better and cheaper at the same time, which is a combination that established manufacturers almost never see coming until it is too late. In 1970, Shimano made a decision that had nothing to do with bicycles. Shimano launched into the fishing tackle business. The decision was made because fishing would contribute to people's health and continue to be enjoyed into the future, and because Shimano's existing manufacturing technologies could be directly applied. The logic was straightforward. A fishing reel is a precision gear mechanism inside a metal housing. Shimano had been making precision gear mechanisms inside metal housings for nearly 50 years. The product category was different. The manufacturing problem was almost identical. The fishing tackle division was launched as a second business pillar, aligned with the corporate vision of contributing to public health by encouraging outdoor activities. Fishing tackle was added to Shimano American Corporation's product offerings in 1970. From the first day the division existed, the American market was already in the plan. In 1971, Shimano released the Dux spinning reel by harnessing technologies refined in the manufacture of bicycle components, such as gears and body structures. The Dux was not aimed at American anglers, it was aimed at Japan. Shimano needed to learn how to make reels before it could compete in the most demanding fishing market in the world. In 1972, Shimano released the Dux Auto. It featured an automatic shifting mechanism whose gear ratio changed automatically depending on the load during winding. It attracted considerable attention for its stainless steel bearings and compact size. Shimano was learning fast, but learning in Japan was not enough. To compete in America, Shimano needed to understand American anglers specifically, what they fished for, how they fished, and what made them buy one reel over another. The answer came through a man named Lou Childre. Lou Childre was a South Alabama entrepreneur. In 1973, he introduced the Speed Spool bait casting reel to the American market. The reel was manufactured in its earliest years by Shimano. Childre's original interest in Japan, grown bamboo for his fishing rods, had taken him to Japan, where he ultimately teamed with Shimano. The Speed Spool was unlike anything American bass fishermen had used before. Lou Childre and his Speed Spool are credited with introducing the low-profile baitcast reel shape, a smooth palming side cover with no knobs for user comfort, and the disengaging level wind. These were not incremental improvements. They were a complete rethinking of what a bait casting reel could be. American bass anglers responded immediately. The Speed Spool sold, and while it sold, Shimano watched everything, which features anglers praised, which they complained about, how the reel held up in the field, and what they wished it could do that it could not. Shimano was not just a manufacturer on this project, it was a student. The partnership did not last. Childre did not live to see his Lou's products skyrocket in popularity during the bass craze of the late 1970s and into the 1980s. He died in 1977 when a plane he was piloting crashed, and that event led Shimano to enter the American market with its own line of reels. In effect, Childre's death marked the beginning of the ascension of Japanese fishing tackle companies. Childre's death ended the manufacturing relationship, but it did not end what Shimano had learned. Every insight gathered during those years, building the Speed Spool, went directly into the reel Shimano was already developing on its own. Shimano dispatched engineers to the United States to conduct a field survey for approximately 1 year. The survey found that users needed a more lightweight, compact, and precise reel. Shimano thoroughly reviewed the structure of its prior products, seeking a simpler but stronger design. The development concept focused on user-friendliness, joy, and presence. 1 year, Shimano sent engineers to America, not to sell anything, but to listen. They watched bass fishermen cast, they asked what frustrated them about existing reels, they measured what mattered, and they came back to Sakai with a precise set of requirements. Then they built the Bantam 100. In 1978, Shimano launched the Bantam 100 at the American Fishing Tackle Manufacturers Association show. known today as iCast. The reel was released for sale later that year, with delivery in early 1979. The Bantam 100 could handle 6-pound line, something no comparable reel of that size had previously achieved. It quickly became the lightest reel on the market. Those two facts mattered enormously to bass fishermen in the western United States, where light line fishing was standard practice. A lighter reel reduced fatigue over a full day of casting. A reel that could handle 6-pound line without the line slipping behind the spool opened up techniques that heavier reels made impossible. Shimano focused its advertising on the reel as small and light, yet capable of catching the biggest fish from the nastiest cover. They ran a series of ads showing anglers battling sharks, tarpon, and other saltwater fish. The campaign worked, and Bantam 100s were soon selling all over the nation. The advertising strategy was deliberate. Shimano knew that American anglers, particularly bass fishermen, were aspirational buyers who wanted gear that could handle anything. Showing a compact, lightweight reel fighting a shark in open water told that story without a single word of explanation. The impact on the industry was immediate. It was rumoured that fishing tackle manufacturers around the world were copying the Bantam design. Shimano's reputation in the baitcasting reel market was boosted, and for export, Shimano changed its mode of shipment from sea freight to air freight to meet demand. That detail is easy to overlook. It means demand was so high and moving so fast that waiting weeks for a ship was no longer acceptable. Shimano was air freighting fishing reels across the Pacific to keep American tackle shops stocked. The Bantam 100 did not just sell well, it proved something. It proved that American anglers would choose a Japanese reel over an American or European one if the Japanese reel was better. It also proved that Shimano, a company that had spent its entire existence making bicycle parts, could walk into the most competitive fishing tackle market in the world and win on its first serious attempt. The Bantam was just the beginning. The Bantam 100 opened the door. What Shimano built next kept it open permanently. To understand why Shimano's fishing reels became the global standard, it helps to understand exactly what they are made of and how they are made. The answer starts not in a fishing tackle factory, but on a bicycle component production line in Sakai City. Cold forging shapes metal using compressive force, transforming the original material into a near-final shape. The technique achieves high rigidity while reducing overall weight, making it ideal for producing strong and lightweight parts for both bicycles and fishing tackle. Cold forging is the key. Every gear inside a Shimano reel is produced this way. The Haganei gear is produced by applying approximately 200 tons of pressure to raw metal. The technology involves no cutting work. It forges a high-precision gear with micron-level accuracy in a single process. The gear teeth are ultra-refined, enabling seamless engagement and power transmission, reducing noise while improving the sensitivity felt in the angler's hand. Haganei matters. Micron-level accuracy means the tolerance, the allowable difference between the design size and the actual size, is smaller than a single human hair. In a fishing reel, that level of precision translates directly into what anglers describe as smoothness. When a Shimano reel feels different from a competitor's reel, that difference is not marketing, it is geometry. Precision cold forging preserves the metal flows of the metallographic structure, the gear with its metal structure intact. Along the processed shape is highly resistant to impact. The surfaces of a Haganei gear have virtually no irregularities. Even after repeated use over multiple fishing seasons, the gear generates minimal noise and continues to reel smoothly. Precision endures. No American fishing reel manufacturer in the 1970s or the 1980s had developed this level of gear production. They were making good reels. Shimano was solving the manufacturing problem at a level the competition had not reached yet. Shimano had an engineering advantage. By the late 1970s, Shimano was not just selling reels in America, it was building the infrastructure to stay. The Bantam series was introduced in 1978, followed by X-Line rods in 1981. Annual sales exceeded 50 billion yen in the mid-1980s. Annual sales reached new heights. 50 billion yen. In the mid-1980s, that translated to roughly $250 million. Shimano was no longer a curiosity in the American fishing market. It was a major commercial force. The product line expanded systematically. The first American market, Shimano spinning reel, arrived in 1983. It was called the BBX reel. It was a plastic-bodied, lightweight freshwater fishing reel. BBX opened a different market. The BBX was aimed at a different angler than the Bantam 100. The Bantam targeted experienced bass fishermen who wanted the best bait casting reel on the market. The BBX targeted the broader freshwater market, the angler who fished lakes and rivers for trout, bass and walleye with a spinning rod. Shimano was not chasing one customer. It was building a product ladder that covered every type of American freshwater fishing. In 1984, Shimano created the Shimano Japan Cup. It was a fishing competition designed to promote the enjoyment of fishing. That same year, Shimano expanded into Canada. Japan Cup became part of the strategy. The Japan Cup was a deliberate cultural move. Shimano understood that fishing tackle is not a purely rational purchase. Anglers are passionate. They follow tournaments. They watch what the best fishermen use and then buy the same gear. By creating and sponsoring competitions, Shimano embedded its brand into the culture of fishing, not just into tackle shops. In 1988, Shimano set up a UK subsidiary focused on fishing tackle sales. That same year, Shimano shifted some of its fishing reel production to Singapore. Moving production to Singapore was a cost and logistics decision. The rise of the Japanese yen in the late 1980s made manufacturing in Japan increasingly expensive for export markets. Singapore offered lower production costs without sacrificing the quality controls Shimano required. The reels that reached American tackle shops were still Shimano reels. They were simply assembled on a different side of the world. Meanwhile, the materials science inside Shimano's reels was accelerating. By the mid-1980s, Shimano recognized the need for stiffer and lighter reel construction. In 1985, the Titano series arrived. It used a composite construction combining titanium fiber, carbon fiber, and resin materials. Titanium fiber, carbon fiber, resin. In 1985, those materials were associated with aerospace and Formula One racing. Shimano was putting them into fishing reels. The Titano series was aimed at the Japanese market first, but the technology it demonstrated, that a fishing reel body could be built from advanced composite materials, set the direction for everything that followed. Then came the Stella. Shimano developed the SBL, the Shimano Balance Lock, to significantly reduce handle shake during rotation. Such shaking had been accepted as the norm for a spinning reel. Since its sensational debut in 1992, the Stella has enjoyed overwhelming support from users around the world. The amazingly smooth reeling feel could be experienced the moment an angler picked it up. Handle shake had been a known problem with spinning reels for decades. Every manufacturer lived with it. Shimano decided to solve it. The SBL system counterbalanced the rotating rotor so precisely that the vibration anglers had always attributed to the nature of spinning reels simply disappeared. To eliminate rotation noise, Shimano used a metal housing with high rigidity and precision. The manufacture of those housings was outsourced to a camera parts manufacturer to attain precision equivalent to that of precision electronic devices. These efforts led to the release of the Stella in 1992, a camera parts manufacturer. Shimano went outside the fishing industry entirely to find a factory capable of machining metal to the tolerances the Stella required. That decision tells the entire story of how Shimano approached product development. If no fishing tackle supplier could meet the specification, Shimano found someone who could. The first Stella model was exhibited at the Tokyo International Fishing Show. The product was suspended using a single line and attracted great attention. The reel was free from shaking during handle rotation and offered a light and smooth feel that visitors had never experienced in a spinning reel before. The 1995 model was equipped with the SHIP system, smooth and high power, which dramatically increased gear reeling performance. Each successive generation did not simply refine the previous model. It introduced a new technology that made the previous generation feel outdated. The Stella SWC, the current top-of-the-line saltwater Stella, retails between $950 and $1,350. A fishing reel that costs $1,350. That price is not an accident, and it is not simply a luxury markup. It reflects the cost of the manufacturing tolerances, the materials, and the engineering that goes into each unit. It also reflects what serious anglers, guides, charter captains, and tournament competitors are willing to pay when they need equipment that will not fail them. By 2012, Shimano introduced the Micromodule gear system. It featured precisely shaped gear teeth designed to deliver smooth reeling and excellent power transmission. The Micromodule system increased the number of contact points between the drive gear and the pinion gear. More contact points means more even load distribution, which means less wear, less noise, and a smoother feel across the entire retrieve. It was the same logic Shimano had applied to bicycle drivetrains for decades, and it worked in a fishing reel for exactly the same reasons. The scale of what Shimano built across those decades is measurable in precise numbers. In 2024, Shimano recorded total revenue of $2.87 billion. Fishing tackle represented 23.3% of that total. 23.3% of $2.87 billion is approximately $669 million. That is the annual revenue of the fishing division alone, a division that did not exist before 1970, built by a company that had never made a fishing reel before the Ducks in 1971. Shimano maintains a prominent position in the global fishing tackle industry, particularly as a leading brand in spinning reels, competing closely with Daiwa and Abu Garcia. Together, these top three companies command over 55% of global market share. North America's fishing reels market dominated the global market with a revenue share of 60.3% in 2024. The United States held the largest revenue share within that region. The United States is the single largest fishing reel market in the world. Shimano, a company founded in Japan to make bicycle parts, is one of the dominant forces in that market. The resolution is not complicated. In the first quarter of 2026, Shimano's fishing division reported an 18.5% increase in sales compared to the prior year. The company cited firm interest in fishing tackle, appropriate inventory levels, and robust demand for high-priced products, particularly in China and Europe. Shimano started with one borrowed lathe, one product, and a 40 square meter room. It conquered the American bicycle market before most American cyclists knew the brand existed. It entered fishing with no history in the sport and turned a one-year field survey into a reel that air freighted itself across the Pacific because demand outpaced ships. It solved the problems that every other manufacturer had accepted as permanent, and it priced the solution at whatever the engineering required. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, please like the video and subscribe. It helps us tell more stories like this one. In 1955, Tokyo is still rebuilding from the war. Steel is scarce. An engineer named Yoshio Matsui opens a small workshop and starts making fishing reels for export. The reels are cheap. Nobody outside Japan knows his name. Today, that company, Daiwa, is one of the world's most influential fishing tackle brands, with operations across Japan, China, Vietnam, and Malaysia. How did a post-war export workshop get there? Japan after the war. In August 1945, Japan surrendered. The war was over, and the country was in ruins. American firebombing had destroyed large portions of Tokyo. Industrial factories that once produced aircraft engines and military equipment were either bombed out or forcibly shut down by the US occupation authorities. Thousands of workers had no jobs. Millions of people had no reliable food supply. The US occupation government, known as GHQ, took direct control of Japan's economy. Their goal was simple: rebuild Japan as a stable, non-military trading nation. They redirected Japanese factories away from weapons and toward consumer goods. Sewing machines, bicycles, radios, cameras, anything that could be exported and sold abroad. Japan had one serious advantage: decades of precision manufacturing for military hardware had left the country with a deep pool of skilled engineers and metalworkers. Those skills did not disappear when the war ended. They needed a new target. The man behind Daiwa, Yoshio Matsui, was one of those engineers. Matsui was born in 1906. He was trained in precision metalworking, the same discipline that had built Japan's wartime machinery. He was also an obsessive angler. He fished constantly, and the more he fished, the more he saw a problem. The fishing reels available in Japan in the early 1950s were functional, but barely. They were heavy, prone to jamming, and produced with inconsistent quality. A reel that performed well one day could fail the next. No manufacturer was applying serious engineering discipline to the problem. Matsui believed he could do better. Building the foundation. In 1955, Matsui opened a small workshop in Tokyo. He called it Matsui Manufacturing. The operation was modest: a tight facility, a small team, and a single focus: building spinning reels for export to the American market. America mattered because American anglers were buying. The post-war US economy was booming. Recreational fishing was growing fast. By the mid-1950s, millions of Americans fished regularly, and the tackle industry was struggling to keep up with demand. Matsui saw the gap and moved toward it. 3 years later, in 1958, Matsui formally incorporated the company as Daiwa Precision Works Corporation. In Japanese, the name was written using kanji characters. The kanji for Daiwa is one of the oldest words for Japan itself. The name was chosen deliberately, and the first reel test was already coming. How fishing reels worked before Daiwa. To understand what Daiwa did, you first need to understand what a fishing reel actually is, and what was wrong with the ones that existed before 1965. A fishing reel is a mechanical device attached to a fishing rod. Its job is to hold fishing line, release that line when you cast, and wind it back in when you retrieve. That is the entire function. Simple in concept, brutally difficult to engineer well. In the 1950s, the dominant reel on the global market was the closed-face reel. A closed-face reel is exactly what it sounds like. The fishing line sits inside a closed housing, a sealed cup that covers the front of the reel completely. The line feeds through a small hole in the center of that cup when you cast. The closed-face design had one major problem. Because the line was trapped inside a housing, the amount of line you could store was severely limited. Less line meant shorter casts. Shorter casts meant fewer fish. Anglers who needed distance, tournament competitors, saltwater fishermen, anyone casting into open water, were working against the very tool in their hands. There was a second problem. Because the line was enclosed, you could not see it. If the line twisted, kinked, or tangled inside the housing, You had no way of knowing until you tried to cast and the whole thing jammed. Fixing the problem meant disassembling the reel on a riverbank with wet hands. It was a frustrating, time-consuming experience that anglers had simply learned to accept. By the early 1950s, the fishing tackle industry had been selling variations of this same basic design for decades. Nobody had seriously challenged it. Daiwa was about to. The problem Matsui saw. By 1958, Matsui Manufacturing had been producing reels for 3 years. The company was selling into the American export market and building a reputation for reliable, consistent quality. But Matsui was not satisfied with reliable. He was chasing something better. Matsui and his engineers spent those early years studying exactly where the closed-face reel failed. The answer kept pointing to the same place: the spool. The spool is the cylindrical component around which the fishing line is wound. In a closed-face reel, the spool sits inside the housing. That housing was the constraint. It limited spool size, it trapped tangles, and it blocked the angler from any direct contact with the line. The solution, in theory, was straightforward. Move the spool outside the housing, put it on the front of the reel, exposed, where the angler could see it, access it, and load as much line onto it as the cast required. In theory. In practice, moving the spool outside the housing created a cascade of new engineering problems. The line now had to travel from an exposed, rotating spool onto the rod and out through the guide smoothly, without friction, without twist, without the line collapsing back onto itself mid-cast. The mechanism that wound the line back onto the spool after a cast had to be redesigned from scratch. Every single component that had been built around the enclosed design needed to be rethought. Matsui's team worked through those problems one by one. The material problem nobody was solving. By the late 1960s, Daiwa's open-face reel had established the company as a serious global player. The US subsidiary opened on September 26, 1966, operating from a small facility in Culver City, California. Sales were growing, the brand was gaining recognition, and Matsui's engineers were already looking at the next problem. The problem was weight. Every fishing reel in the world, including Daiwa's own products, was built from metal. The body, the rotor, the side plates, all metal. Usually aluminum or zinc alloy. Metal is strong. Metal is durable. Metal also has a fixed weight, and that weight does not go away. For an angler casting once or twice, reel weight barely registers. But serious anglers do not cast once or twice. A tournament-based fisherman might cast 200 to 300 times in a single day. A fly angler casting for hours along a river works their wrist and forearm constantly. Over a full day, the weight of a metal reel accumulates into genuine physical fatigue. Tired arms mean less accurate casts. Less accurate casts mean fewer fish. There was a second weight problem that was harder to solve: corrosion. Metal corrodes. In freshwater, corrosion is slow. In saltwater, the environment for some of the most demanding fishing on Earth, corrosion is fast and aggressive. Salt crystals work into every seam and joint of a metal reel. They grind against the gears, they stiffen the drag, they destroy bearings. Saltwater anglers in the 1960s and the 1970s expected to go through reels regularly. It was accepted as the cost of fishing in the ocean. No manufacturer had seriously addressed either problem. The industry had built better and better metal reels, more precisely machined, more carefully assembled, but the fundamental material was always metal. That constraint had been treated as permanent. Daiwa decided to challenge it. Carbon fiber was not a new material in 1979. Engineers had been working with it since the 1960s. Carbon fiber is made by weaving together extremely thin strands of carbon atoms into sheets or tubes. Those sheets are then bonded with resin to create rigid structural components. The result is a material that is significantly lighter than aluminum, roughly 1/3 the weight, while being comparably strong under most load conditions. By the 1970s, carbon fibre had found applications in aerospace and high-performance racing. Fishing rod manufacturers had also begun experimenting with it for rod blanks, the long tapered shafts that make up the rod itself. Carbon fibre rods were lighter and more sensitive than fiberglass, and they quickly became the preferred choice for serious anglers. But nobody had applied carbon fibre to real construction. A fishing rod is a relatively simple structural component, a tapered tube that flexes under load. A fishing reel is a complex mechanical assembly with spinning parts, gear trains, drag systems, and dozens of individual components that must interface precisely at high rotational speeds. Getting carbon fibre to work in that environment required solving a completely different set of engineering problems. Daiwa solved them. In 1979, Daiwa became the first manufacturer in the world to incorporate carbon graphite into both the reel body and the rotor. The rotor is the spinning arm that wraps line back onto the spool during retrieval, and it is one of the highest stress, highest speed components in the entire reel. Building it from carbon fibre required a precise understanding of how the material behaved under rotational stress and how to engineer the component geometry to take advantage of carbon's strength without exposing its weaknesses. This was an engineering first for the industry. The result was a reel that weighed dramatically less than its metal predecessors, with a construction that was naturally resistant to saltwater corrosion. Anglers who picked it up noticed the difference immediately. The reel felt almost startlingly light compared to anything else on the market, but it was not fragile. Under load, when a large fish was pulling hard against the drag, the carbon body held without flexing. The fishing tackle industry stared at what Daiwa had done and scrambled to respond. Daiwa did not wait for the competition to catch up. Instead, the company declared carbon fibre its primary area of technological focus and began a multi-decade program of refining, improving, and pushing the material further than anyone else in the industry. By the end of the 1970s, Daiwa's global reputation had shifted. The company was no longer just the brand that had built a better spool. It was becoming known by a new phrase that engineers inside and outside Daiwa would repeat for the next 40 years: the carbon specialist. But the carbon work was far from over. In 2007, Daiwa released a material that made everything before it look like a rough draft. Then came MagSealed in 2010. There is a component inside every fishing reel that most anglers never think about until it fails. It is called a ball bearing. A ball bearing is a small metal ring containing a set of tiny steel balls that rotate between two surfaces. Its job is to allow one component to spin relative to another with almost zero friction. In a fishing reel, ball bearings sit at every major rotation point: the main shaft, the handle knob, and the rotor pivot. Without them, the reel would grind itself apart within minutes of use. Ball bearings are precision components. They are manufactured to tolerances measured in fractions of a millimeter. They require consistent, uncontaminated lubrication to function correctly, and they are deeply vulnerable to one specific enemy: water. When water enters a ball bearing, it washes away the lubricating oil that keeps the steel balls spinning freely. Once the oil is gone, the bearing runs dry. A dry bearing running at speed generates heat through friction. That heat accelerates wear. In salt water, the problem compounds rapidly. Salt crystals left behind as the water evaporates grind between the steel balls and their races. They pit the surfaces and make every rotation slightly rougher than the last. An angler fishing in the ocean could feel a reel degrading over the course of a single season. By year 2, bearings that had been silky smooth at purchase were noticeably stiff. By year 3, some were grinding audibly. This was not a Daiwa problem specifically. It was an industry-wide problem. Every manufacturer used metal bearings. Every metal bearing was vulnerable to water. The standard solution was rubber sealing, small rubber rings pressed around the bearing to block water ingress. Rubber seals worked partially. They kept larger volumes of water out, but rubber is a solid material pressing against a rotating surface, which means it creates friction. That friction slows the bearing's rotation and adds resistance to every retrieve. In a high-end reel built for silky smooth performance, rubber seal friction was a meaningful compromise, and rubber seals still allowed microscopic water vapor to pass through over time. In 2010, Daiwa released a solution that the industry had not seen before. They called it MagSealed. MagSealed uses a substance called magnetic fluid in Daiwa's proprietary formulation referred to as MagOil. Magnetic fluid is a liquid that contains millions of nanoscale iron particles suspended in a carrier oil. When placed in a magnetic field, those particles align along the field lines. The fluid becomes semi-rigid, and it holds its shape and position as long as the magnetic field is present. Daiwa's engineers placed a ring-shaped magnet around the ball bearing. They then introduced MagOil into the gap between the magnet and the rotating bearing shaft. The magnetic field held the fluid in place as a continuous liquid ring, a seal with no solid components pressing against the rotating surface. The result was a bearing that was completely isolated from water, without any friction penalty. MagOil did not press against the shaft. It floated against it, held in position by magnetism. The bearing could spin at full speed with zero additional resistance, while the fluid ring around it blocked water, dust, and salt particles completely. After Daiwa's testing program put prototype mag-sealed bearings through extreme stress cycles, repeated saltwater immersion, high-speed rotation under load, and sustained pressure testing, the bearings performed identically to their pre-test condition. No degradation, no roughness, no evidence of contamination. MagSealed made its public debut in 2010 in the Sertate, one of Daiwa's premium spinning reel lines. Anglers who fished the Sertate in saltwater reported something they had never experienced before, a reel that felt the same in year 3 as it had on the day they bought it. The technology had come directly from aerospace engineering, the same class of material science used to seal rotating components in spacecraft and military hardware. Daiwa had crossed an industrial boundary no fishing tackle manufacturer had crossed before. 3 technologies, 45 years of engineering, the open face reel in 1965, carbon graphite in 1979, MagSealed in 2010, each one had solved a problem the rest of the industry had accepted as permanent. But technology alone does not build a global company. For Daiwa to become what it is today, it needed to move beyond Japan. And that expansion started with one small facility in California, why America was the only market that mattered. In 1966, the United States had more recreational anglers than any other country on Earth. Fishing in post-war America had grown from a rural subsistence activity into a mainstream leisure industry. The post-war economic boom had given tens of millions of American families disposable income and free weekends for the first time. They bought boats, they bought gear, they drove to lakes and rivers every weekend in enormous numbers. By the mid-1960s, the United States recreational fishing industry was generating hundreds of millions of dollars in annual revenue, and it was still growing. The American fishing tackle market had a structure that worked in Daiwa's favor. It was fragmented. Dozens of domestic and international brands competed for shelf space in tackle shops and sporting goods stores, but no single manufacturer dominated. The market rewarded performance and price simultaneously. Anglers wanted the best reel they could afford, and they were willing to switch brands if something better appeared at the right price point. Daiwa had spent the first decade of its existence building exactly that, a technically superior product at an accessible price. The open face reel, released in 1965, was the proof. It outperformed what American anglers were used to. It was priced within reach of the average recreational fisherman. And it was coming from a Japanese manufacturer that had no legacy reputation in the American market to protect, which meant Daiwa had nothing to lose by disrupting it. The decision to enter the United States was not cautious. It was direct. Why Europe was a different challenge. Europe presented a different problem than America. In the United States, recreational fishing was largely unified around a handful of dominant styles: bass fishing, trout fishing, and saltwater sport fishing. The tackle preferences that came with those styles were well understood. A manufacturer who built a good spinning reel and a good bait casting reel could address the majority of the American market with a focused product lineup. Europe had no such unity. European fishing culture in the 1970s was deeply regional and intensely traditional. British coarse anglers, fishermen who targeted species like carp, bream and roach in rivers and lakes, fished with techniques and equipment that had developed over centuries. They had strong opinions about gear and strong loyalty to established brands. French anglers fished differently from British anglers. German anglers fished differently from both. Scandinavians fished for different species in different environments with different tackle requirements. To build a serious European business, Daiwa needed to be physically present inside those markets, manufacturing products adapted to local preferences, working with local retailers, and earning trust from communities that did not automatically respect foreign brands. That meant building in Europe, not just selling into it. The two-tier manufacturing strategy. By the mid-2000s, Daiwa had built a global manufacturing. In the late 1890s, a beekeeper from Dowagiac, Michigan, threw a wood chip into a pond. A bass struck it. That accident launched a company that, by the 1920s, became the world's largest producer of fishing tackle. His name was James Heddon. He was born in 1845. He spent his career raising bees, editing a newspaper, and serving as mayor of Dowagiac. Fishing was never the plan. Then one afternoon changed everything. James Heddon. James Heddon was born on August 28, 1845, in the Genesee Valley, New York. Early in his life, his family moved west. They settled in Dowagiac, Michigan, a small city in Cass County in the southwestern corner of the state. Dowagiac's name came from the Potawatomi word Dugiog, which means fishing near home water. The town was built on a creek. Lumber mills ran along it. Small businesses filled the streets. It was a working town, and Heddon fit right in. A man of many jobs, Heddon did not arrive in Dowagiac as a fisherman. He arrived as a man who worked. Over the course of his life, he worked as a telegraph operator, a shoemaker, and a dancing teacher. He edited and owned the Dowagiac Times newspaper, starting in 1887. He served as mayor of Dowagiac. He was restless, driven, and constantly building something new. But the work that defined him, before fishing ever entered the picture, was beekeeping. On February 13, 1869, Heddon married Eva Hastings. Eva's father was a beekeeper named Charles Hastings. For 1 full year, Heddon trained under him. That apprenticeship was all it took. He threw himself into apiculture, the science and business of raising bees, with total commitment. He invented his own style of beehive. He wrote a book on beekeeping in 1885. He published a beekeeping trade journal. He built a mail-order catalogue for beekeeping supplies. He eventually became president of the American Beekeepers Association. By the 1890s, Heddon was shipping approximately 10,000 pounds of honey per year to cities as far away as Cincinnati and Detroit. He was not a hobbyist. He was one of the largest honey producers in the country. Then his body turned against him. Heddon developed an allergy to bees. The career he had spent 3 decades building was over. A new obsession around 1900, at approximately 55 years old, a friend introduced Heddon to high-quality fishing rods and reels. At the time, most people fished with a cane pole, a length of line, and live bait dropped into the water. There was no casting, no movement. The angler sat and waited. Heddon's friend showed him something different. With a silk line and a quality rod, a person could cast a lure 30 to 40 feet across the water. The fish came to you. That was the moment everything shifted. How people fished in the 1890s. In the 1890s, fishing in America was simple, brutally simple. An angler walked to the water's edge, pushed a cane pole into the mud, tied a length of line to the tip, and attached a hook baited with something alive, a worm, a frog, a small minnow. Then they sat down, and they waited. The fish either came, or they did not. The angler had almost no say in the matter. There was no casting, no retrieval, no technique to master. Fishing was patience with a hook attached, and it had been done this same way for centuries. No one had seriously challenged that model, not yet, what an artificial lure even was. At the time, the idea of an artificial lure, a fake manufactured object designed to trick a fish into striking, barely existed. Fly fishing had been practiced for centuries. Fly fishermen tied hooks with feathers, fur and thread to mimic insects sitting on the surface of the water. But fly fishing required a specific type of water, a specific type of rod, a specific technique that took years to learn, and equipment that most working Americans could not afford. For everyone else, the farmers, the shopkeepers, the families fishing for food along the rivers of Michigan, live bait was the only option. Nobody had built a hard wooden mass-produced lure designed to be cast across open water and retrieved. The technology did not exist. The market for it did not exist. Most fishermen would have found the idea absurd. James Heddon was about to prove them wrong. The day at the mill pond, the exact moment the artificial lure was born, is the subject of one of the most repeated stories in American fishing history. The story goes like this. Sometime in the late 1890s, James Heddon walked down to the Dowagiac mill pond. The mill pond sat just east of town, fed by Dowagiac Creek. Heddon was there to meet a friend. The friend was late. While he waited, Heddon did what he always did with idle hands. He whittled. He pulled out a piece of wood and carved it down, smaller and smaller, until there was not much left worth keeping. When his patience ran out, he tossed the wood chip into the water and prepared to leave. A bass exploded out of the water and hit it. Heddon stood there and stared. The fish had not been fooled by a living creature. It had struck a bare, shapeless piece of carved wood. No hook, no bait, no resemblance to anything alive. Just movement on the surface and a base that could not help itself. Today, a small park in Dowagiac marks the spot. It is called James Heddon Park. A sign at the water's edge reads that it was near this spot in the late 1890s that James Heddon sat whittling while waiting for a friend. When he got up to leave, he tossed the small piece of wood into the water, where it was immediately struck by a bass. That seemingly insignificant event led James Heddon to imagine and build a topwater lure, which he called the Dowagiac. By the 1920s, James Heddon's Sons was the world's largest producer of quality fishing tackle. But did it really happen? Here is where the story gets complicated. Donald Lyons is a researcher from Dowagiac. He wrote the book The Heddons and Their Bait, which is one of the most thorough accounts of the Heddon Company ever compiled. Lyons spent years tracking down primary sources, letters, catalogues, factory records, and interviews with former employees. He never found a single piece of evidence that the mill pond story happened while Heddon was alive. Lyons said the first time he saw the story mentioned was in brochures printed around 1948. That is nearly 4 decades after James Heddon died in 1911. In 1948, Heddon's company had an advertising director named Homer Circle. Circle was a gifted writer. He would go on to become a legendary columnist for Sports Afield magazine and was later inducted into the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame in 2012. He was, by every account, a tremendous storyteller. Lyons' assessment was straightforward. A group of people, likely including Circle, sat around a table and crafted a story. They needed something vivid, something that captured who Hedden was, something that made the origin of the company feel like destiny. The wood chip story fit perfectly. It may be completely true. It may be a crafted legend. The primary sources that could confirm it are gone. Every person who was there in the late 1890s was dead by 1948. What is not disputed is the result. Whether the Mill Pond story is history or myth, James Hedden went home and started carving wooden fishing lures. And they worked. Building the first company. By 1901, Hedden had moved from giving lures away to selling them. He set up operations in a small, upstairs room at 303 Green Street in Dowagiac. The lures were still being made by hand, carved, painted, fitted with hooks in the Hedden family kitchen. The kitchen had become a small production floor. Around 1902, Hedden's eldest son, Will, joined the company. Will invested $1,000 of his own money. That investment made him a partner. The 1903 catalogue officially reads, James Hedden and Son, singular, marking Will's arrival in print. Will was not a businessman. He was an outdoorsman. What he wanted was to be outside, on the water, testing lures. That instinct turned out to be exactly what the company needed. Around 1903, Will and his wife relocated to Florida to run research and development from the warmer, bass-rich waters of the South. The first patent and the Dowagiac casting bait. On April 1st, 1902, James Hedden received a patent for his first commercial lure. The lure was called the Dowagiac casting bait. It is known today among collectors as the slope nose. It was a white, torpedo-shaped wooden body with a blue slope nose and a red metal collar at the rear. It had two treble hooks, one at the midpoint of the body and one at the tail. It looked unlike anything that had been sold before. It was not trying to look like a frog. It was not trying to look like a minnow. It was a shaped piece of painted wood with hooks attached, designed to be cast across the water and retrieved along the surface. In his first product catalogue, Hedden described exactly why he had built it that way. He wrote, "In angling for bass, nothing is gained by making the bait resemble any living thing. The black bass is primarily a fighter, secondarily a feeder. Therefore, that lure which excites his belligerency rather than his appetite is best calculated to place in the creel. It is the commotion in the water and not the resemblance to frogs or minnows which attracts the bass." This was not a casual opinion. This was a design philosophy, and Hedden was stating it publicly in his very first catalogue. He understood something that almost no one in the fishing industry had articulated. A bass does not strike because it is hungry. It strikes because it is aggressive. The job of the lure is not to deceive, it is to provoke. That principle drove every lure design James Hedden and his sons ever produced. Ever. The Dowagiac minnow and the factory expansion. By 1904, demand had outgrown the family kitchen. Hedden built a dedicated factory in Dowagiac. That same year, he secured a sales distributor in Canada, the first international reach for the company. The operation was no longer a cottage industry, it was manufacturing. In 1905, Hedden introduced the Dowagiac Minnow 100. It was a different kind of lure, designed to run underwater rather than on the surface. The body was wooden and hand-painted. The eyes were made of glass. Each lure had 3 long, flowing gill marks painted beneath those glass eyes. The craftsmanship was striking. Early Hedden catalogues stated that every minnow received between 7 and 12 coats of special porcelain enamel, and that the finish was guaranteed not to peel or crack. This was not a cheap product. At up to $1 per lure, at a time when a day's wages for many workers was under $2, a Heddon lure was a considered purchase. The anglers who bought them caught fish consistently. The lures worked, and word spread beyond Dowagiac, beyond Michigan, and across the country. What Heddon actually changed? Before James Heddon, fishing was a static activity. The angler went to the fish. They dropped bait in front of it. They waited. After Heddon, fishing became dynamic. The angler stood at the water's edge and cast a lure 30 to 40 feet across the surface. They retrieved it. They felt the tension in the line. They watched the water for the strike. When the base hit, they saw the explosion. Researcher Donald Lyons described the shift directly. He said, "You could cast out lures, see the explosion as the fish would strike the lure and jump. It helped create the bass market as we know it today." That shift from passive waiting to active pursuit is why bass fishing became a sport rather than just a method of putting food on the table. It is why fishing tournaments exist. It is why bass boats exist. It is why the recreational fishing industry in the United States generates billions of dollars annually. James Heddon did not intend to create all of that. He was a retired beekeeper who had found something that excited him. But the lure he carved, the company he founded, and the philosophy he put in his first catalogue set everything that followed in motion. He died in 1911 at the age of 66. He never saw what his sons were about to build. The man who actually built the business. James Heddon died in 1911 at the age of 66. He left behind a patent, a factory, a small catalogue of wooden lures, and a company that had been operating for less than a decade. What he did not leave behind was a clear successor with the temperament to run a growing manufacturing operation. Will Heddon, James's eldest son and first business partner, was an outdoorsman at heart. He wanted to be on the water in Florida, testing lures, not managing a factory floor in Michigan. Will had contributed enormously to the early product development, but running the day-to-day operations of a scaling company was not where his energy went. That left Charles. Charles Heddon was James's younger son. He had joined the company sometime between 1903 and 1908. By the time the 1908 catalogue was printed, the company name had changed from James Heddon and Son to James Heddon and Sons, marking Charles's arrival as a full partner in the business. Charles had something Will did not. He had a sharp, focused business mind. He understood production, distribution, and scale. Where James had been an inventor and Will had been a tester, Charles was an operator. He took control of the company, and he built it into something his father never could have imagined. What Charles inherited. To understand what Charles built, it is important to understand what the fishing tackle industry looked like in 1911. Artificial lures were still a novelty. The idea of a manufactured wooden plug cast across open water and retrieved along the surface was less than 2 decades old. Most American fishermen still used live bait. The anglers who had adopted artificial lures were early adopters, curious, experimentally minded men willing to spend $1 on something unusual. Heddon's factory in Dowagiac was producing lures, but the company's catalogue was small. The Dowagiac casting bait had been on the market since 1902. The Dowagiac minnow had been introduced in 1905. A handful of other models had followed, but the range was limited and the market was still being educated. Charles understood that growing the company meant 2 things: expanding the product line to give anglers more options and building the distribution network to get those products in front of buyers across the entire country. He did both, aggressively. A factory unlike anything Dowagiac had seen. Under Charles's leadership, the Heddon factory in Dowagiac expanded into one of the largest and most sophisticated manufacturing operations in the fishing tackle industry. The factory produced everything under one roof. Wooden lure bodies were cut, shaped and sanded on the production floor, then moved to the paint room, where each lure received between 7 and 12 coats of porcelain enamel, applied by hand, layer by layer, with drying time between each coat. Glass eyes were set into the bodies, and metal hardware, including hooks, line ties, diving lips, and propellers, was fitted and secured. The operation was precise, and Heddon's reputation was built on quality. Charles protected that reputation with strict production standards. The factory produced lures. It also produced rods, reels, fish decoys, and other fishing gear. During World War II, when the government required manufacturers to redirect production toward the war effort, the Heddon factory shifted output entirely. It produced golf club shafts, ski poles, violin bows, box kites, and radio antennas for the military. Between 1902 and 1984, the Heddon factory in Dowagiac produced approximately 410 different catalogue lures. That number does not include colour variations, hardware variations, or limited production runs. It is the count of distinct, named lure models, 410 separate designs across 82 years of production, expanding the lure catalogue. Under Charles and the generation that followed him, the Heddon catalogue grew steadily and strategically. Each new lure addressed a specific fishing situation that the existing lineup did not cover: deep water, shallow water, fast current, still ponds, aggressive bass, cautious pike. The Heddon team, led primarily by Will's field testing from Florida and Charles's production oversight in Michigan, worked systematically through the possibilities. In 1922, Heddon introduced the Zaragoza 6500. It was a wooden surface lure with a slender, elongated body. The Zaragoza was designed to be retrieved with short, rhythmic twitches of the rod tip, causing the lure to swing from side to side across the surface in a motion that triggered aggressive strikes from bass. In 1925, the Torpedo 130 arrived. The Torpedo was a surface lure built around a spinning rear propeller. When retrieved across the water, the propeller churned and spattered, creating a disturbance on the surface that drew fish from a distance. The Torpedo's design has survived for over a century. A version of it is still in production today. In 1929, two more lures entered the catalogue simultaneously. The River Runt 110 was a diving lure, a short, stubby, weighted body designed to run beneath the surface rather than on top of it. At up to $1 each, Heddon lures were already not cheap, but the River Runt's ability to reach fish holding in deeper water made it indispensable to serious anglers. It sold millions of units. Researcher Donald Lyons described it as perhaps Heddon's biggest commercial success. That same year, 1929, August 17, 1962, the cover of Life magazine features Marilyn Monroe. The lead story is about her death. It is the magazine's biggest selling issue of all time. Buried inside is a 2-page article about a Finnish fisherman and a handmade lure. Orders for 3 million lures flood in. Normark, a small Minnesota distributor, can fill only a fraction. That lure was carved by one man, born in 1905, fishing a lake in Finland to feed his family. Today, Rapala VMC is the world's largest fishing lure company, and it is losing ground. Who was Lauri Rapala? Lauri Rapala was born in 1905 in Sisma, in what was then the Grand Duchy of Finland. His mother was a serving maid. His father was not in the picture. When Lauri was 7 years old, his mother Mari moved with him to the parish of Asikala, a small rural community about 116 kilometers from the capital, Helsinki. The clergyman at the parish ran into a problem. They could not remember the family surname, Saarinen, and so recorded it instead as Rapala, the name of the village in Sisma they had come from. The word Rapa in Finnish means mud. That clerical mistake became the name the entire fishing world would one day know. The world he was born into, Finland, in the early 1900s, was not an easy place to survive. The country had no major industrial economy. Rural families lived off the land and off the water. Fishing was not a hobby, it was how people ate. Europe's economy deteriorated further as the effects of the Great Depression in America arrived in Europe. Laurie worked as a lumberjack during the winter and as a farmer's hand or commercial fisherman in summer. There was no single career, there was only the next season. A life spent on the water. Laurie met Elma Leppänen when he was in his early 20s. They married in 1928 and lived in her parents' house in Riihilahti until 1933. The lake that defined his life was Lake Päijänne. He fished its waters surrounded by evergreen forests and hundreds of interconnected lakes. Every morning, he rowed out alone. He trolled about 1,000 hooks on a trot line behind his traditional Finnish rowing boat, known in Finnish as a sytyvene. He baited every hook himself. He had no motor. He rowed approximately 50 kilometers, 31 miles, every single day, except in storms. 3 trout weighing just 3.6 kilograms, 8 pounds total, earned the equivalent of 2 full weeks of pay at a nearby factory. The margins were razor thin. One bad season meant the family went hungry. That pressure is what pushed Lauri Rapala toward an idea no fisherman had ever successfully acted on before. How fishermen caught fish before. 1936, for thousands of years, fishermen used one method: live bait, a real worm, a real minnow, a real frog on the end of a hook. The fish could smell it, feel it, and taste it. It worked. Artificial lures existed before Lauri Rapala. Metal spoons had been used since the mid-1800s. A metal spoon is exactly what it sounds like: a curved, shiny piece of metal attached to a hook. When pulled through water, it spins and reflects light. Some fish strike it out of instinct. The metal spoon worked sometimes, for some fish in some conditions. But a spinning metal spoon does not look like a fish. It does not swim like a fish. It does not wobble like an injured fish struggling to stay upright. The gap was clear. No one had built an artificial lure that truly moved the way a wounded baitfish moved. No one had studied how predatory fish actually hunted and then built something to match it exactly. Lauri Rapala spent years staring at the answer from his rowing boat. What Lauri saw on Lake Päijänne. With so much time on the water, Rapala had much time to think, to observe, and to learn how the fish behaved, how the minnows swam, and how the injured minnows were more likely to be eaten by the larger fish. The observation was simple. When a large predator fish, a pike or a perch, attacked a school of minnows, it never chased the healthy ones. The healthy minnows were fast, coordinated, and moved together as a group. The predator ignored them. It went after the one that swam differently, the one that listed slightly to one side, the one that could not keep pace, the one with the off-center wobble that signaled to every predator in the water that this fish was weak, injured, and easy to catch. According to the recollection of his son Risto, our father really understood fishing. He recognized the relationship between bottom structure and where fish are located. He learned how fish fed and how they moved from one location to another, and Rapala understood the effects of weather on fishing. Rapala thought that an artificial lure could bring in more fish, and therefore more money, in addition to eliminating the time needed to bait hooks. He had identified the exact trigger that made a predator fish strike. Now he had to build something that produced it. Building the first lure, 1936. Lauri had no workshop. He had no engineering tools. He had no budget for raw materials. He had a shoemaker's knife and whatever he could find around the house. After a lot of trial and error, and with the help of a hermit fisherman named Toivo Pilvalainen, who lived on an island of Lake Päijänne, and Rapala's friend Akseli Soramäki, he created a lure with the right wobble to imitate an injured baitfish. Toivo Pilvalainen was a man who had spent his entire life alone on the lake. He understood fish behavior at a level most people never reach. His input helped Lauri solve the hardest part of the problem, not what the lure looked like, but how it moved. The lure was carved from cork with a shoemaker's knife, covered with chocolate candy bar wrappers, and coated with melted photographic film negatives for a protective outer layer. Laurie could not afford lacquer, the standard coating material, so he sourced melted photographic negatives as a substitute. The tin foil from chocolate wrappers gave the lure a silver sheen in the water. His first lure was created and designed for the purpose of catching pike. Pike are ambush predators. They sit still in shallow water and wait for something weak to swim past. They are exactly the kind of fish that strikes with a wounded minnow action without hesitation. When completed, Laurie tied a string to his thumb and trolled it behind his boat. Pike and perch attacked it voraciously. His sons, who were young at the time, claim he would often bring in 270 kilograms, 600 pounds, of fish a day. Every day on a lake where 3 trout weighing 8 pounds total had previously represented 2 weeks of factory wages. The first commercial sale, 1938. Word spread quickly in a small Finnish village. Neighbours noticed Laurie was coming home with more fish than anyone else on the lake. They wanted to know what he was using. In 1938, a local cooperative store in Kalkkinen started selling Rapala lures, marking the first commercial breakthrough for the company. Kalkkinen is a small village on the southern shore of Lake Päijänne. The cooperative store was the kind of general shop that rural Finnish communities depended on for basic goods. It was not a sports retailer. It was not a fishing tackle chain. It was a village shop that recognized the lures were catching fish and put them on the shelf. 2 years after Laurie carved the first lure by hand, it was a product for sale. He still had no factory, no employees, no business plan. Just a knife, some cork, and a technique no one else had figured out. First exports, 1955 and 1956. In 1955, the first Rapala lures were exported to Sweden. Norway followed in 1956. Sweden and Norway are Finland's closest neighbours. The fishing cultures of all 3 countries overlap significantly. Scandinavian anglers targeted the same species, pike, perch, trout, and fished the same type of cold, clear northern lakes. The Rapala lure worked there for the same reason it worked on Lake Päijänne. The fish behaved the same way. 2 countries in 2 years. The lure had crossed its first international borders before it had ever been seen in North America. The lure reaches the United States. Some of Rapala's lures made their way to the United States through the American Embassy in Helsinki, as well as the community of Finnish immigrants in America. Finnish immigration to North America had been significant in the early 20th century, particularly to the upper Midwest states of Minnesota and Michigan. Finnish immigrants brought their customs, their language, and in some cases, their fishing tackle. These lures caught the attention of Ron Weber, owner of a fishing tackle sales company called R.D. Weber Sales. Ron Weber was a Minneapolis-based sales representative. His entire professional life was built around fishing tackle. He knew what worked and what did not. He had seen thousands of lures. He had never seen anything that fished the way this one did. During a Canadian fishing trip in the summer of 1959, Weber's fishing partner pulled out an unfamiliar lure and tied it on his line. Suddenly, where there were no fish, there were fish galore. Weber came home from that trip with one objective: find out who made that lure and get a contract to sell it in the United States. Weber and his business partner Raymond Ostrom contacted the Rapala family through the Finnish Trade Council in Chicago, and a business partnership was established. Raymond Ostrom was the owner of Ostrom's Marine and Sporting Goods in Minneapolis. Together, Weber and Ostrom had the distribution network, the retail relationships, and the sales experience to bring a foreign lure into the American market. When Laurie received Weber's original letter, he had to have the foreign language text translated by a school teacher at the village school in Kalkkinen. The man who built the world's most effective fishing lure had never received a business letter in English before. He needed a school teacher to read it to him. Normark is founded. Weber and Ostrom's company was initially called the Rapala Company. It eventually changed its name to Normark. They placed their first order for 1,000 Rapalas in September 1959. 1 year later, they ordered 2,400. Between 1960 and 1961, that number grew to 31,135 lures. 1,000, then 2,400, then 31,135. In 2 years, demand multiplied by a factor of 31, and that was before a single magazine had printed a word about it. What Lawrie left behind. When Lawrie Rapala died in 1974, he left behind a business that had already outgrown him. The factories in Varksy and Rihilahti were running. Normark was distributing lures across North America. Orders were coming in from countries Lawrie had never visited. The operation had long since moved beyond one man with a shoemaker's knife and a tank of water. But it was still, at its core, a family business. Lawrie had never hired outside executives. He had never taken investment from a bank. Every person involved in making and selling the lure was either a family member or a trusted local. That structure had worked for 38 years. Now it had to work without him. After the passing of Lawrie Rapala, the company was passed on to his sons, Risto, Esko, and Ensio, who had all been involved in the company's business for a long time. It was during this time that Rapala was reformed into a limited company, Rapala Oy, a formal limited company structure registered under Finnish law. It was the first time the business had a legal corporate identity separate from the Rapala family name. The sons had grown up making lures by hand in a shed. Now they were running a company, the Shadrap 1982. In 1982, the company released the Shadrap, which led to an immense rise in demand. The Shadrap still remains one of the company's best-selling lures. The Shadrap was a different kind of lure from the original floater. Where the original floater was designed to mimic an injured minnow swimming near the surface, the Shadrap was a crankbait, a lure designed to dive below the surface when retrieved, running at depth where larger predator fish hold position. It was shaped like a shad, a common bait fish found in North American rivers and lakes. American bass anglers, in particular, responded immediately. Bass fishing in the United States was not just a pastime in 1982. It was a competitive sport with professional tournaments, television coverage, and millions of recreational participants. When a lure proved itself in bass fishing, the entire American market paid attention. The Shadrap proved itself fast. It demonstrated something important. The company could build new products that worked. The original floater was Lawrie's invention. The Shadrap was the son's proof that Rapala could innovate beyond its founder. Building the distribution infrastructure, early 1990s. Through the 1980s, Rapala continued to grow, but its distribution was fragmented. In North America, Normark handled everything. In Scandinavia, separate distribution arrangements had been in place since the 1955 Sweden export, but the company did not own its own distribution network, and it relied on partners. That changed in the early 1990s. In the beginning of the 1990s, Rapala acquired the distribution company Normark Scandinavia, marking a major expansion for the company. Normark Scandinavia was the distribution arm responsible for getting Rapala lures into the hands of retailers across Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Finland. By acquiring it, Rapala stopped paying a middleman and started controlling the relationship with retailers directly. The margin that had previously gone to a distributor now stayed inside the company. This was the first major acquisition in Rapala's history. It was a signal that the sons were thinking about the business differently from how Lawrie had. Lawrie built a product. His sons were building a system. The family sells, 1995. The system kept growing, and growing companies eventually reach a point where family capital is no longer enough to fund the next stage. In 1995, the Rapala family sold Rapala's stocks to a new company founded by 6 members of the Rapala family. The management of the Rapala Company, Bankers Trust and its subsidiaries, and funds managed by CVC Capital Partners Europe. Bankers Trust was a major American financial institution. CVC Capital Partners was a European private equity firm. These were not fishing people. They were investors who looked at Rapala's revenue, its brand recognition in 140 countries, and its demonstrated ability to grow, and decided it was worth putting institutional money into. 6 members of the Rapala family remained involved in the new ownership structure. But for the first time since 1936, the people with the largest financial stake in the company were not from Lawrie's family. By 1997, the family had sold its remaining stake entirely. The business Lawrie built alone on Lake Paijan was now controlled by private equity, going public in 1998. 3 years after the family sold the business, the company went to the stock market. Management, together with some private equity investors, listed Rapala Normark on the Helsinki Stock Exchange in 1998. The Helsinki Stock Exchange is Finland's primary financial market. Listing on it meant that any investor, individual or institutional, Finnish or foreign, could now buy a piece of Rapala. The company's value would be calculated daily based on the share price. Its financial results would be disclosed publicly every quarter. Its strategy would be scrutinized by analysts. This was the furthest possible structural distance from a fisherman testing lures in a tank. A major restructuring followed. In a few years, Rapala sold both its boat and caravan business and acquired the Normark distribution companies in the USA, Canada, the UK, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Holland and Finland, as well as the French company Ragot. The boat and caravan business was a legacy diversification from earlier decades, a side operation that had nothing to do with fishing tackle. Selling it meant the public company was focused entirely on fishing. Acquiring the Normark distribution companies in 8 countries meant Rapala now owned the entire supply chain from factory to retailer in its most important markets. Storm, VMC and the push toward dominance from 1999 to 2001. With institutional capital, a public listing and direct distribution in its key markets,